Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Heritage at Home. I'm going to give it an extra minute now just so people can get comfortable, get settled, get ready. We're going to have a great session coming up. So we'll start in a little while. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. We've got Heritage at Home coming up, so thank you for being part of Outing the Past, the International Festival of LGBT History. And of course, this is being hosted by our wonderful friends in Northern Ireland, so thank you very much for joining us. We have got a wonderful panel coming up today. And so I'm just showing you some of the guest names that we've got coming up so you can see them all. We've got some wonderful people who've given up a lovely Saturday to be with us and to share their stories. So the concept of Heritage at Home today is going to be our wonderful guests are going to present an object or something that is deeply personal to them and tell us how that opens a door into their own LGBT plus past. And it is an absolute delight to have you with us today. I'm a patron of LGBT plus History Month, and we've got 7 wonderful guests. They're going to share us incredibly personal stories, and then we're going to have a panel discussion. So we've got the wonderful Maisie, who is keeping a track of the Q&A session. So during the talk, if you want to put in questions, please do type them in, and Maisie will keep an eye on it. Because I think when we get past the halfway mark, we will have seen everybody, and then we can go into a panel discussion and a bit of Q&A. So it is a treat to start off. I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves, and we're going to just get right into it now. Joey, would you like to go first, please?
Hi, thank you everyone. Point out to me if you can't hear me at any time. I'm quite new to Zoom, but I'm trying this out. This is me as Mr. Stokes, the man, woman of Manchester for LGBT History Month in 2016, written by Abby Hynes, who's joining us later in this session. Amazing team. Thank you to everybody who works on it. I'm just going to show you a few photos while I try and talk about my object. Because this is me opening the play with Joe Dakin on the mortuary slab, because Harry Stokes was pulled out of the canal, and he, in rehearsals, this was my object. Can everybody see that? Nod, participants, yes. So I had to have my balls cut off this object so I didn't have an erection on the mortuary slab when the Joe's character was undressing Harry, who was dead, and he came back to life. And then we flashed back into his life, and she played 3 of the characters that he was married to or had relations with. And all this obviously is brought up by amazing research from academics, which brought this true story to life. So this is my object, and I've got a few photos and maybe a video clip, but as soon as the trousers start being accessed, Harry sits bolt upright and the play continues. So there's just a few photos. I'll try and get out of the way then if I'm out of the way, it means the pictures don't come up. So yeah, really quickly, there's Harry meeting the person who undresses him, Ada, and then we have the different characters that the true stories from historical records as much as could be found. And this is the little photo where Harry gets his cock out. So these are obviously really interesting questions to me as a trans man about, you know, how Harry wore his penis, and there's various clips in newspapers that spoke of him being the man, woman of Manchester, and there's a little song that I was hoping to share. Is he a fella or is he a lass? Man, woman of Manchester's bold as brass. He'll take your daughter upon his knee, heaves his bosom and stands to pee. Not one or the other, not fish, not fowl, but he's been poking his prick round town. Has he more or has he less? Who's in his breeches is anyone's guess. Only his and missus could tell you true. Beware, he'll make a cuckold of you. So it's got lots of comedy in it. We're all hoping to develop it to full production. And here I'm going to try and give you a little snippet of the video. Here we go, bear with me. There we go.
I've heard stories, you know, women making pals of each other. Well, don't be thinking you're making a couple of me.
You're all right, Tal.
Marching about the place all them years, pretending to be something you're not. Why? Harry. Was your name Harriet? Harriet Stokes. Little Miss Hattie.
Shut your mouth.
Well, why? What are you going to do? Great big man like you.
I'll shut it for you if you don't stop jabbering.
Oh, we both know you haven't got the balls for it.
That's so. You just wait, missus. I'll show you. Ha!
What's that then?
What do you think it is? It's a prick.
Oh! That's not funny.
Oh, well, I don't suppose it is where you're standing.
Give me a break, I'm in fright.
A married woman like you is nothing you ain't seen before.
Well, that's certainly not the likes of what I've seen on a man. Do you think anyone can take the bits and pieces off and throw them around the place? What? Who knows what you've got down there? For all I know, it could be something demonic.
Oh, demonic, that's lovely, that is.
And here I am thinking, oh, poor soul, it is our prayers, or else he'll never go to God, confused creature that he is. But how do I know?
Okay. I'm back with you. Brilliant. I think I've had me 5 minutes for sure.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Joey. That was brilliant. All right, Abby, you are up next, please.
Hi everyone, I'm Abby Hynes. I'm the writer that Joey mentioned. I worked with Joey and our brilliant team with LGBT History Month, including Stephen Hornbury, who's Festival Theatre Director over there. I'm actually going to talk about something else. I'm glad that Joey's covered Mr. Stokes so brilliantly. I'm sorry to have to follow with what seems like an incredibly boring object in comparison, but my object is this very untechnical postcard of Hateley. For anybody who doesn't know, I can see Dan's smiling in recognition. For anyone who doesn't know, Hateley was probably the most famous male impersonator on the music hall stages. So she was around at the turn of the century. Her career lasted from roughly 1870 to kind of 1915, 1920. And even if you haven't heard of her in terms of historical record before, you probably know a bit about her, or some of her songs and characters might be familiar. Her most popular character was called Burlington Bertie, and the song Following in Father's Footsteps, some of you might sound familiar. So I've had a few different encounters with Tilly over the years. The first one, though, I didn't know it at the time, was the brilliant adaptation of Tipping the Velvet, starring Keeley Hawes. That's based on a novel by Sarah Waters. The TV adaptation was in 2002. I didn't encounter it until a few years later than that, when I was coming out as a teenager and kind of finding the then fairly sparse amount of lesbian stories that I could get my hands on TV and in films. And it's always great with the Sarah Waters because, you know, the lesbians probably aren't going to die at the end, which is always a bonus. So I loved that adaptation. That put me onto Sarah Waters' novels. And then it wasn't until I was studying theatre at university and I got totally fascinated by all things gender non-conforming, and particularly by this era of cross-dressing that was happening around the turn of the century, and particularly in the music halls. So at that point, when I started looking into Tilly, I realised that she was the inspiration for Sarah Waters' Tipping the Velvet. I thought that had just been fictional and entirely made up, but it's quite clearly based on Tilly. And at that point, as part of my degree, I wrote my own play called Tilly, in which a fictionalized version of Tilly had a lavender marriage with a male drag performer. We wrote our own music hall numbers. We choreographed kind of music hall inspired dances. I was being a bit of a wanker and called it a play with songs rather than a musical at the time, but it was really a musical. And that play focused on the years in which Tilly spent singing recruitment songs for World War I. She was considered a really big part of the war effort, and kind of a big part of the sort of cultural pressure that was building around young men going off to war and being told that they were cowards for staying put. So kind of complicated. And then my most recent interaction with Tilly was last year in 2019, when Stephen Hornby approached me to write a monologue as part of a series of monologues that we were doing at Bolton Museum around their brilliant touring LGBT history exhibition. When it came to Bolton Museum did a fantastic thing, and they didn't just plonk the exhibition into their museum as is, but they looked for queer stories from Bolton's own history to add into that collection, and to have a kind of really rich local experience going alongside that. Now, Tilly visited Bolton twice that we know of, once at kind of the height of her fame in 1892, and once again towards the end of her career in 1909. Now, I came with a slightly different attitude to Tilly this time, and I think by this point I'd realised that Tilly herself wasn't the thing that most interested me about Tilly. She wasn't queer herself. There's absolutely no historical evidence that she was. She was married, quite a prominent gentleman. She became known as Lady de Vries. She was quite politically conservative herself, actually, when she wasn't performing as a stage boy. But despite that, lots of people, and I count myself in good company to be among Sarah Waters, lots of people have read queerness into historical figures like Tilly. There's this queer space that opens up around her. So partially in the past, when you think about the kind of people who might have had someone like Tilly as a pin-up, but especially in the present. And I think that's what really interests me. So if you look at drag now, if you look at performances like, if any of you have heard of the Pecs Drag King Collective in London, they're not spaces that are wholly sapphic, and certainly like in Tipping the Velvet in Sarah Waters' interpretation, it's a very lesbian space that she conjures. And actually drag, I think, is more complicated than that. But it is by its nature queer aligned, I think. And what it does that continues to fascinate me, and what still feels really radical, is that it centers the female gaze and female desire in a way that we are still just not that used to seeing. So I suppose I'm just really, I'll leave it there, but I'm really interested to hear other people's experiences of kind of finding the past in the way that it makes queer spaces in the present.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Abby. I think that's a really interesting discussion to pick up shortly. But for now, we're going to go to Yuen. So hello, Yuen.
Hello there. Hi, my name is Yuen, and I'm a Sheffield based in, I'm an artist based in Sheffield, and also a senior lecturer at Sheffield Hallam University. And my objects are these. They are a pair of sandals, and these relate to a project that I developed called Towards Memorial. And the artwork explores the making, gifting and wearing of these sandals that were once designed and made by gay socialist writer, poet, activist Edward Carpenter, who was born in Brighton, 1844, died in 1929 in Guildford. And this is while I was kind of digging around Sheffield archives and kind of came across these. Now I knew of Edward Carpenter from one of his selected writings that the Gay Men's Press developed back in the 1980s. And this was a kind of selection of edited texts by Noel Grieg, who was the director of the Gay Sweatshop. But Carpenter, so these are pretty brand new and they smell great if you want to smell them. And they were inspired by a trip to India and Ceylon. And he introduced the concept of the sandal back into the UK as an idea that would free the foot from what he called the leather coffins of the boots. And boots were widely produced at this time by not only cobblers, but kind of makers as well, in alongside lots of kind of market gardening activities around socialist and communist farming communities in Sheffield around the kind of late 1800s. But the sandals came about because he was a massive advocate of a simplification of life. And he writes about this in one of his key texts. And it's an address to the excesses of kind of Victorian middle and upper classes, and he argues very practical measures about how you can change a kind of domestic lifestyle to kind of reduce this kind of impact of mass production and environmental impact, etc. So he advocated for kind of single fabric use of a suit, or kind of upcycling clothing, grow your own, make your own. So it's all part of that ethos where economy was kind of somewhat linked to your sense of self and your spirituality. So if you're not familiar with Carpenter, this is a little picture of him. And there's him with the sandals as well. So, I found these really, really fascinating images because this was someone who was kind of cultivating a very othering sense of self in the public eye when it was illegal to be kind of homosexual. And I was kind of exploring this kind of queering that the sandal symbolized, because this would be something that would be not normal in, Sheffield around that time. So the project really enabled me to connect with a number of people, of which an ethical shoemaker called Noble and Wiley, and they helped me design these shoes. And what I was able to do in that space was to kind of evoke the questions and some of the problems that may have occurred around the production of this sandal during Carpenter's time. And, so when we talk about accessing history, the making of the work was somehow exploring that kind of conjunctive gap where I could kind of place my artwork in it, etc. So one of the aspects of the work that I did was to gift these to people who were kind of continuing Carpenter's legacy. And the group that I found were the Friends of Edward Carpenter, who were going to develop a permanent public memorial to Carpenter in Sheffield. So this meeting was really, really crucial to this project, because then I realized I could be thinking about these sandals as an alternative form of memorial making. And this was really significant at the time because it relates quite pertinently to, questions around monument making in view of kind of Black Lives Matter, etc. And I think that's my time, but we could pick up on some of these thoughts again. Thanks.
Amazing, Yuen. Thank you so much. Well, we're going to walk in the footsteps of giants, perhaps, from Sheffield to Bristol now. Cheryl.
Yes. Hello, everybody. I'm Cheryl Morgan, and I'm an ancient historian and also a historian of the ancient world. So the sort of things that I have tend not to be around my house. They're either in museums somewhere, or better still, they're still in place at the various archaeological digs where you can find them. So I'm just going to briefly share my screen, and hopefully we will get a view of my object, which is an image of a mosaic which is found in a place called the Villa of Cicero on the road between Pompeii and Herculaneum. It's called the Villa of Cicero, and we do know that Cicero, the famous Roman orator, owned a villa in the Pompeii area. We're not quite sure whether this one is it. It's been named that because it is such an opulent villa. It's big, there's lots of fabulous art in there. But it's not actually linked with any evidence to Cicero, and Mary Beard says that it doesn't follow the description of Cicero's village from the written sources, and I'm not going to argue with Mary. So we'll just say it's a villa near Pompeii. So that's my object. But to understand it, we're going to be talking about theatre again, because that image is taken from a play. And we're going to go back around 500 years, it's around 320 maybe BCE, something like that. No, sorry, it's 307 there. Oh, I can't do these things, 320, whatever. It was a time in ancient Greece where there's a new movement in comedy called the New Comedy. The problem was that the sort of bawdy, satirical, political plays done by people like Aristophanes had fallen out of favor because Greece had been conquered by the Macedonians, and it wasn't politically safe anymore to do political plays. So this new breed of playwrights were doing much more domestic comedy. And the most successful of those was a chap called Menander. He wrote over 100 plays, 108, I think, in total. And he was reasonably successful in his life, but he became fantastically popular afterwards. And his plays were still being performed right through the Roman Empire and into Byzantine times. And the play that is illustrated in our mosaic is called Theophoromene in Greek, and that means the girl possessed by a god. Now, we don't have much of the actual text of the play. There's only a few short fragments that have survived, but there are also at least 4 illustrations in mosaics and frescoes. So clearly it was a very popular play. I think there are more illustrations of that one than anything else that he did. Now, what we can gather from the text we've got is that this is all about unrequited love. There's a young man called Lysias who is in love with a girl, and the girl has told him that she can't marry him or whatever because she has taken religious orders. She's now possessed by a goddess. And so Lysias thinks that this is all just a ruse to get rid of him, and he comes up with a scheme to prove that it's a ruse. Now, the important point about here is when I say she's taken religious orders, she hasn't become a nun. There were lots of different gods you could worship in ancient Greece, and this particular girl has become a devotee of the goddess Cybele. And that's kind of like the ancient Greek version of saying that you've become a hippie, gone to live on a commune, and you're going to eat mushrooms and have lots of sex. It's not a respectable thing to have done. So there is a definite suggestion that perhaps she is actually making all of this up. But one of the things that the worshippers of Cybele were known for is that there was street musicians who would go around playing music and begging for money for the temple. And they would also do ecstatic dancing. So Lysias's plan was he would get a bunch of these street musicians and have them play outside the girl's house. And if she was genuinely possessed by the goddess, then she would have to come out and do this ecstatic dancing. But if she was just pretending, she would be far too embarrassed to do this. Now, we do know that she does actually dance because there is a mosaic in Antioch which shows her doing that, but it's much more important from our point of view to go back to the mosaic, and we can see these street musicians, because it's the musicians that interest me. And in particular, in the background there is a woman playing a double flute, which is a traditional instrument. It's called an aulos. Now, we don't know much about what Kybele worship was like in Greek times, but in Roman times, the worship of Kybele was very much associated with trans women. This was a cult where you join the religion, be castrated, reborn as a woman, and live as a woman for the rest of your life. So to a Roman audience, seeing Kybele involved, they would immediately be thinking of this. That character is dressed as a woman, but could quite easily be a trans woman, and in fact would have been played on stage by a man, because they didn't allow women to take part in plays. You can tell a lot about Greek theatre because everybody is wearing a mask, and the mask that that character is wearing is a mask that's generally associated with sex workers. So again, that's a sort of connection, you know, trans women, sex work. There is this thing that goes on. And we also know that the galley, these trans women associated with the cult, they did actually play those instruments. We've got illustrations of them showing them not only the flute, but also the cymbals and the tambourine and so on. So my question is, what have we got there in one of these most brilliant pieces of art, of the mosaic maker's art, in a really opulent villa near Pompeii? Is that a historical depiction of a trans woman? Because that would be wonderful.
Wow, amazing. Thank you very much, Cheryl. So we're going to go to Cyril now.
Hello, hi everybody. My name's Cyril Unry, and I'm an actor and occasional writer and director when I'm not being lazy. Yeah, I thank you for inviting me onto this, particularly Sue. Yeah, this is my object. It's a book called Brother to Brother, and it's edited by a band called Essex Hempel, and conceived by Joseph Bean. It's a book that came out in 1991, and I didn't actually get it till 1998. I came out rather late in the day, in my day anyhow, and in the front of the book, I've written to Cyril, from Cyril, because you deserve to be you, much love, August 1998. And I read a lot. When I was growing up, I read a lot. There wasn't a lot around that described my condition as such, described my humanity, particularly from a Black point of view. And there were books, but I hadn't discovered them. And when I first was having feelings at school and whatever, there definitely weren't books. There were a few, as somebody's just pointed out. There were things like, you know, Lover's Legend, gay Greek myths, but actually this came out a lot later. But so you would have had to go around the libraries and find these stories, you know, hidden deep in some sort of British library, you know, researcher's pocket, on the gaze of the day of the Greeks. And then there were people like Baldwin, my hero, but they were a long way away from me, all those people. And this book in particular, which, as I say, was edited by Essex Hempel, was a revelation when I did start giving myself permission to be me. And in it, in fact, I keep a little newspaper article which was from around that time. And it's a newspaper article on John Fashanu. And it's all about his suicide, which happened at the time. And in it he says, "I wish that I was more of a good son, brother, uncle and friend. This seems to be a really hard world, but I tried my best. Because of my homosexuality, I wouldn't get a fair trial. I want to die rather than put my friend's family through any more unhappiness. I hope the Jesus I love welcomes me home. I will at last find peace. And I think if you're a young black gay man around that time, there weren't many examples, and one of the poems in this, written by Essex Hempel, is called Commitments. And I'll just read that. It's Commitments. I will always be there when the silence is exhumed, when the photographs are examined. I will be pictured smiling amongst siblings, parents, nieces, and nephews. In the background of the photographs, the hazy smoke of barbecue, a checkered red and white tablecloth laden with blackened chicken, glistening ribs, paper plates, bottles of beer and pop. In the photos, the smallest children are held by their parents. My arms are empty. Or around the shoulders of unsuspecting aunts, expecting to throw rice at me someday. Or picture tinsel candles, ornamented imitation trees, set for Thanksgiving, a turkey steaming the lens. My arms are empty in those photos too. So empty, they would break around a lover. I am always there for critical emergencies, graduations, the middle of the night. I am the invisible son. In the family photos, nothing appears out of character. I smile as I serve my duty. And, I had wandered around, just being in the background there, being, never quite acknowledging who I was, what I was, all those things. And then this book was right on the mark, and it's a collection of stories and essays and others by Black gay men. It wasn't the first of these books, actually. There was another book called In the Life, which Joseph Bean wrote slightly earlier, which I discovered later because Brother to Brother was the first one of those books that I discovered, and it just released me, and I just want to pay acknowledgement to them. And in these last 30 seconds that I've got or so, in 2014, I was asked by John Gordon and Ricky Beadle-Blair to take part in a book, which was called Black and Gay in the UK, an anthology of Black gay writing. And I was so proud to be asked to be included in that. And it was a direct result of the book Brother to Brother, and how that had allowed me to come and be myself. And I'll just read the tiniest bit of the story I wrote, which is right at the back of the book, the last of the stories in there, which is called Black and Gay in the UK. And Labby Sifri wrote a song called Why Isn't Love Enough? Good question. I have a first name gifted to me with love by my parents. All of my experience, knowledge, and instinct to date has filled that name with whatever current meaning and significance, if any, that it may have. I also have a family name to go with it. It is not a gift. It was more of a legacy. My family name gives me a place, context, and history. Neither name has race or sexuality. Race and sexuality are just part of what I bring to my name. Together, my given names encompass me. Yesterday morning, not for the first or last time, I fell in lust with a man on the northbound Northern Line platform. A dark black, midnight blue black man, an inch taller than me. I looked at the ripple of tiny skin just below the hairline at the back of his neck, then the strong gym-worked shoulder blades, and on down to the biceps that scared his t-shirt sleeves, forcing them to double back on themselves. I wondered how safe and protected I would feel held in this all-man embrace. I'll finish there and let you find the rest of the story for yourself. But as a direct result of that, book, Brother to Brother, it allowed me to be me. And, that's led me to meeting people like Sue, and on and on. Without that, without that literature, without being able to find that stuff, I wouldn't have found me. That's it. Thanks.
Oh, Cyril, I'm tingling. Thank you very much. We're going to turn now to our host family. So we're going to have Richard and then Grainne. So we're going to Northern Ireland now. So Richard, over to you.
Thank you, Dan. I'm Richard O'Leary, and I'm the coordinator of the LGBT Heritage Project here in Northern Ireland. I'm also a visiting scholar at the School of History at Queen's University, and I'm a performance storyteller. In 1984, for the Christmas holidays, I returned to my hometown of Cork, to my parents' house. At the time, I was increasingly aware that I was probably gay. Therefore, I felt uncomfortable at returning, even for 2 weeks, to live in the family home. I felt my father was quite homophobic, and my mother too. She was a conservative Irish Catholic. That said, I had been and still very close to my mother. A closeness such that my younger brother called me MFS, mother's favourite son. On the occasions when I returned home, my mother would invariably say, with sadness in her voice, "Richard, you left home very young. Why did you leave home so young?" I'd left my parents' house and my home city on my 18th birthday. And I'd replied to my mum, "Mum, you know I had to leave home to go to college in Dublin." That answer was a lie. One day earlier in that year of 1984, I'd heard a song on the radio, a song by a band called Bronski Beat. This song, I first heard it on a crackly radio, so please excuse the sound quality. This song was the beginning of a change in my life. That Christmas in 1984 in Cork, I went into the record store, which was called Golden Discs, and I went to the stack of newly released records labelled B. I left the shop having bought the new album by Bronski Beat. This LP, it's my own copy of that LP, which I bought in 1984 and which I still keep in my own home. The album is called The Age of Consent. In 1984, I didn't really know what was meant by the term age of consent, or at least how it applied to gay men. When I pulled out the inner sleeve, the notes listed the ages of consent in 1984 for countries around the world, the age at which it was not criminal for sexual contact between consenting adults. At that time, in the state where I lived, the Republic of Ireland, any sexual contact between men was criminal at any age, whether you were 21 or 71. I read those sleeve notes and I felt my life in Ireland looked bleak. That Christmas 1984, I went into the sitting room of the family home. Every day during the Christmas holidays in the sitting room, my father lit the open fire. I waited until my parents and brothers were not in that part of the house before I removed the LP from the Golden Discs brown paper bag. And I put the album on the turntable of my older brother's record player. And as the record played, I read the lyrics of the song, which were also printed on the sleeve, including the lyrics of that song, Small Town Boy. These lyrics: "You leave in the morning with everything you own in a little black case. Alone on the platform, the wind and the rain on a sad and lonely face. Mother will never understand why you had to leave, but the answers you seek will never be found at home. The love that you need will never be found at home. That was the answer to my mother's question. And when the album was finished playing, I took the sleeve on which was written the International Ages of Consent and the lyrics of the song. But I was so afraid of being discovered that I put the sleeve into the blazing Christmas fire. That's why 36 years later, when today in my own home, I take out my copy of this LP and I remove the record, and the original sleeve is missing.
Wow, thank you very much, Richard. It's the power of what's missing as well sometimes. Also, I've got to say, I think everyone was doing a little bit of bopping as well during that little play. So thank you very much for that wonderful piece of music. Now, Grainne, we turn to you. Our lucky last. Thank you.
Hiya, I'm Grainne. I'm a volunteer with Richard's LGBT Heritage Fund. And my object is my t-shirt here. And on the t-shirt, it says 4 out of 5 cats prefer lesbians. And I got it in London when I was on a couple of visits. At the time, there wasn't any pride in Northern Ireland. There was, oh God. There we go, sorry. There wasn't any pride in Northern Ireland at all. And the troubles in Northern Ireland were still going on. And we were a very conservative Christian country. Homosexuality had just been decriminalised with Jeff Dudgeon had taken the British government to court, and gay men were then allowed to have sex, but they had to be over 21. So I went over to London with my friends in the early 90s. And a lot of my friends, I came out through a group called Car Friend, and they had a men's drop-in. And I was the only woman there. Now, at the time, I wasn't out to myself or to anybody else, to be honest. But I arrived in Belfast and gone to college, and I had come out through a few other friends. I came up to Belfast through 3 other friends. And the Car Friend and Niagara, the Northern Ireland Gay Rights Association, was a support group in Belfast at the time through the sort of 70s, 80s and 90s for gay and bisexual men. So funny, haha, the lesbians there. Anyway, so I went over to London, and the morning of that Pride, we travelled down to the parade on the tube. Now, I'm from a wee rural town in Northern Ireland, the back end of nowhere. And when we got on the tube, sort of in urban London, and kept going closer and closer to London, there was like all the drag queens and absolute fabulousness going on. And I was like, wow, shocker. We were all dressed up and we went into town, and the city was really, really busy. And as I say, it was my first glimpse into what gay life could be. And myself and my friends decided we would have a wander around Soho and look at shops and what have you. We wandered into a shop, and it was called the Clone Zone. Now, for those who don't know, a clone was usually a gay man or bi man who dressed up a bit like Freddie Mercury, who did in the early 80s with the moustache and the hats and stuff. I'm sure Richard would be able to pull out his hat in the ether. And then there was, of course, the Village People with their whole YMCA. So hence the shop was named after that. And I went inside with my 2 friends, and there was magazines, and there was t-shirts, and there was toys. And I nearly had a heart attack and ran out the door. But I persevered, and the t-shirt I showed you sort of caught my eye. I like slogan t-shirts now as a grown adult. and I was looking through t-shirts, and this one caught my eye. And the idea that it said 4 out of 5 cats prefer lesbians. Now, as Joe was saying earlier, I mean, you could switch sort of cats to mean pussy. So it could still read 4 out of 5 pussies prefer lesbians. And that has a whole other context in itself. But anyway, it also appealed to my sort of Monty Python and Carry On humour. Now, I don't know if you follow Monty Python, that were around in the sort of late 60s, early 70s. They've a very camp, over-the-top humour. And at the time, the Carry On movies in the 70s in Britain, which was very sort of conservative towards all things sex, they used to have smutty postcards. And also we have a culture in the UK and Britain of having dames in pantomimes. And generally they're straight men. You know, they're not gay men at all. They're dressed up, and then Freddie Mercury does the whole 9 yards. So, I mean, that whole side of that t-shirt just appealed to me. So I bought it, and I've had many other t-shirts and badges over the years, but I still had this one from one of my very first visits to London.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Grainne. I want to just very quickly reflect on where we've been with everybody, and then Ken, if we could sort of bring up the full panel so we can have a quick discussion. We've got I'd say about 10 minutes to do this. For me, it's been interesting to sort of see everybody reflect on the power of music, on poetry, on plays, about getting dressed up, about stepping into someone else's shoes. But rather neatly, Grainne and Joey kind of have taken us back to toys as well. So I kind of wanted to kick off, Joey, with a question to you, and then I'd want to open it up in terms of the idea of using performance to explore things like gender and sexuality. But Joey, for you, the character, the toy that you have, did the size matter? Did it put you more or less into the character's thought process?
The size of the sex toy cock, this is actually an ashtray. So the balls here, the figure, it's just so symbolic. The stage manager had to take it home and cut it off in his front room whilst watching EastEnders. And it's really relevant to me as a trans person who is a female man with a cunt. Absolutely love my sex toys. There's also the kind of chest binding thing. For me, it opens up kind of beyond the binaries, which then lead to kind of poly identification, because as a trans person, if I sleep with another trans person, what sexuality does that make me? And so that's, I think, what all of this work is working towards, is breaking down those gender and sexual binaries and boxes, and extensions in all kinds of different ways that we transform our bodies. And it's a kind of futuristic way of thinking about how technology and the imagination works with actualizing these types of future potentialities. There you go.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think Joey's point about imagination is really important. We can't realize worlds or identities that we can't imagine yet. And I think that's where ideas about performance and art of all kinds kind of align with the reason that all of us here are interested in our history. It's the same reason that if we can see ourselves, whether that's in history books or on stage, then we can imagine different ways of being. And I think figures like Hateley, who, even if they're performing something that didn't necessarily align with any kind of personal or sexual identity, they were making space for that queer imagination. And when we look at figures like Harry Stokes now, we would probably in now read someone like Harry, who lived his entire life as a man. We would read them as trans, but that identity didn't exist then, that word didn't exist then. So I think what's really interesting is that those histories and those stories can move forward into different eras, and what they mean will change according to who's witnessing them.
Yeah. It's also about what you're able to be in any given time and place, isn't it? And what's legal. So, for example, Harry wasn't allowed to own his own business as a woman, so he passed as a man, and he was a successful builder, and that's how we've been able to historically trace him. And he had various employees, but as he got older, he wasn't able to physically keep up with that strain of a kind of biomasculinity. And there's similar stories that we find with particularly trans men. They have crossovers, different points in time historically, and for me, so much of the play is so emotional and so bang on still to me in this present day. Just like Richard's, I could feel the tears to Richard's song, you know, because that's exactly what I was playing over and over again when I was, you know, I'm 45 now, so I was playing that at 17 in my parents' house as well, like holding back the tears, trying to be a lesbian back in the day. So,
Cheryl, do you have some reflections on that idea of seeing trans representation historically as well, and what that means to people today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hugely important for trans people to be able to see themselves represented in the past, because so much of the anti-trans activism that we see at the moment, particularly in social media and also in newspapers and whatever, is pushing the narrative that trans people simply didn't exist until a few years ago. You know, the 2014, the trans tipping point with Laverne Cox on the cover of Time. There were no trans people before then, apparently. But we know that we've been around forever, and really it's just a question of understanding the role that gender variance has had in various societies. And it's really quite fascinating looking at the different ways in which trans people have become accepted in different cultures. And in our present society, it's very much a scientific thing. People talk about gender identity and gender dysphoria, and there's medical procedures and so on and so forth. But if you look in the ancient world, then it's almost always in a religious context. If you look at ancient Sumer, if you look at the Romans, if you look at the Incas, if you look at the Scythians, look at the native people of North America, the role that trans people played was very often to do with religion in some way. And just to bring it back to the art side, the other place that trans people could find a home was often on the stage, because up until fairly recently in most cultures, it was illegal for women to perform on the stage, and therefore plays had to have men in the roles of women. So, you know, we've seen my presentation with the Greek theatre, but also Robin Craig, who was at this conference last year, is doing some great work on Shakespeare, and Kabuki theatre in Japan. There are lots and lots of examples of that.
Richard, you're muted, I think, if you just, yeah.
Sure, I know there's been it's been a difficult summer for trans people, but maybe to cheer you up, even though in Northern Ireland we have challenges in terms of access to services and legal recognition, I think we've been encouraged by the solidarity and intersectoral support, even in what might consider to be a conservative place like Northern Ireland. And I'd hope that trans people would take some encouragement from some of the things which are happening in this part of the world.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
I just wanted to comment very quickly on the what Joey when he presented his object made me laugh, because I did a program called Cucumber a while back, for Channel 4. And when we were doing that, they made me, although there was never a point when you actually saw my penis on screen, they made me a prosthetic penis. And I'm going to obscure the face of the other actor here. I don't know whether you can see because he hasn't given permission, but oh, there we go. Anyhow, they all found it hilarious to play with this prosthetic penis, you know, particularly it being a black prosthetic penis, which apparently they'd never come across such a thing before. And they used to, you know, anytime, you know, this thing wasn't in my pants, they would find great pleasure in passing it round and playing with this thing. And I always found that a bit weird, you know, all these so-called straight men, you know, finding it very necessary to play with this toy. You know, it was just interesting, and it's just interesting to know when Jay was relating that, you know, particularly as we filmed it all in Manchester. Yeah.
Could I just pop in quickly and talk about Disclosure? I think it is the new film in the States, and Sue. It would be amazing to have a film similar for the UK history of trans people, because we've always been there, and it's just a question of pointing it out.
Thank you. I'm just conscious of time, but I'd like to also just make sure that we do talk about the idea of dressing up and allow Yuen and Grainne to talk. And we've also got Sue Sanders with us as well. So Yuen, did you have any reflections you'd like to share with us? And then we'll go to Grainne and then Sue.
Dressing up, well, I think previous works that I'd done had kind of explored the realms of the life model, where I would just kind of invert that process. So who was doing the looking, and I had these projects where I would be the life model and kind of return that gaze. So this kind of is where the project kind of came about, in this kind of reappraisal of who Carpenter was as a character, but this idea that the shoe could be the kind of starting point of where the body places themselves in that relationship. In that, I'm kind of exploring ideas of authorship and agency, and in gifting these sandals to other people, I'm kind of instilling their own sense of identity, how their body relates to others, etc. So, yeah, I mean, you know, I found kind of Carpenter's character and the way he presented himself to the world really, really kind of compelling, and kind of I connected with that kind of cultivated sense of self, and that's what's kind of exploring in the work as well.
Thank you. Grainne? Or you can move to Sue as well. I think Grainne's just... Sue, did you have any? Thank you.
Well, I just wanted to say a huge thanks to everybody. It's wonderful that we now have a plethora of theatre which is queer. I went to drama school in the 60s, and the piece I did when I left drama school, directed, was Jean-Paul Sartre's In Camera, which was a very strange play, to say the least. Any of you who know it, it's not a happy play about queers, but it was the only thing I could find about queers, and I also subverted it. So the bigger woman was the femme and the smaller woman was the butch, and I tried to play with things, but I had nothing else to play with. And now here you guys are doing the most wonderful stuff, so that people do have queer theatre to play with, and I can't say how grateful I am that you are doing that, and the next generations will find stuff. And you know, I made the point earlier, I was in the swinging 60s in London, but it wasn't swinging for queer people. It wasn't swinging for LGBT people. We've had to come a long way to be able to find our stories. So I'm really hoping that you guys will offer presentations for the LGBT History Festival out in the past next February. It's up on the website. It closes at the end of the month. We've got oodles of hubs really ready and waiting to enable the festival to happen next year. Goddess alone knows in what form it will take. It might be like this. It might be a hybrid of physical and digital, but we will not be silenced. We will be there. And I'm so grateful to you guys for being here today and telling these wonderful stories and just want to say an enormous thank you, and keep at it, because goddess, do we need these pictures and these stories so that we can find ourselves. And at a time when the right is on the move, we've got a lot to challenge, and we've got to keep our strength up. We've got to keep linking together and finding ways to make the world a safe place for everybody. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much, Sue. And Grainne, would you like a word in as well?
Yeah, I'm just sort of picking up on sort of in Northern Ireland, we're very conscious of identities over here. And I mean, as I say, my t-shirt has the word lesbian in it, but as a gay woman, I didn't like the word lesbian for years and years and years. I preferred the word gay. But unfortunately, at the time, Northern Ireland was very like, you know, you have to be this way and you have to be that way for being gay. You know, it was very down the line. And identity has only recently sort of come in, and through it has also come, as Joe and Sue says, the trans identity and the bi identity has come through as well. And if for me, as an older gay woman now who has a 19-year-old son, I think it's just amazing that the whole of the UK and a lot of the world is starting to move forward with that. And long may it last.
Long may it last. Thank you, Grainne. Maisie, I thank you very much for sort of monitoring the channels throughout. We're wrapping up, but where should people go if they want to sort of carry the conversation on?
Well, if people are back for the third panel, which starts in an hour, then the debate can continue in the chat. Otherwise, there will be Twitter, which at OTP Fest, you can access all of our tweets there, and if you can put your question there, then hopefully someone will be able to check it and answer it and go from there.
Amazing, thank you. And Ken has also just mentioned that we've got the crowdfunder project that's available as well, so do have a look, and you can always find information at outingthepast.com. I'm just going to share 2 more slides with you and then we'll wrap up. But first of all, thank you very much to everybody who has been part of today. It has been really, really fascinating, and thank you so much for everyone who's been part of the conversation as well, so it's great to see. So the next session coming up, there will be a bit of a discussion of theatre carrying on as well, I think. Stephen N. Hornby will be there, but also Molly Merriman will be part of the discussion as well. And Molly's actually leading on a project at the moment called The Queer Pandemic, Resilience in Times of Crisis. So interesting. It is about collecting your stories. So very much everybody who's been part today has been telling us about their personal story and connecting up. And this is about you sharing your story as well, because everyday stories are really important for queer history and queer history research as well. So we are interested in the everyday, and that's you. So please do get involved. And also, if you'd like to kind of see more from some of the leading experts in the field who are engaging in queer voices in museums, there is a symposium coming up next Thursday and Friday that's hosted by Hull Museums, working in partnership with Arts Council England. So please do just jump onto my Twitter and you'll be able to find the details. I'm at Dan Nouveau. Again, thank you so much to everybody who's been here today. So if I could play a round of applause sound effect, I would do that right now. So thank you so much, everyone. It's been wonderful being with you. Yay! Richard, put the music back on. Let's dance everybody out.
Yeah.
A great idea.
All right, everyone. See you back at 3. Have a break and see you at 3. All right, Richard, over to you, DJ.
Thanks, Dan.
Good to see you.
Thank you so much, everybody. That was absolutely amazing.
Thank you all.
Thank
See
you, guys.
you soon at the end.
3 o'clock.
Mwah.
Thanks.
Bye.